It's been more than 15 years since service tax was introduced in India. Every year, more services are brought under the tax net, and yet to date, only an estimated 16% of the sector is being taxed. The services sector contributes 60% to GDP, but its tax revenues contribute less than 10%. In an attempt to bring all but a few services under the tax net, the Central Board of Excise and Customs released a revised negative list concept paper in November last year. The list proposes that besides 22 categories of services, such as government services, preschool education, clinical services and the like, revenue from all other services must be taxed. Many argue that the introduction of a negative list must be done at the time of introducing GST. But the government may counter that by saying that an early introduction of a negative list will pave the way for a smooth transition to a goods and services tax.
Hello and welcome to the first of our pre-budget specials. Over the course of the next week, we're going to bring you 3 such shows focused on 3 contentious issues. The topic under focus today is service tax. The moot question being, will Pranab Mukherjee introduce a negative list in this budget 2012? Joining me to debate that are Vivek Mishra of PwC, S. Nageshwari of Tata Communications and Rohan Shah of ELP. Rohan, that very same question first to you. Is Pranab Mukherjee going to use this budget and the desperate need to raise revenue as the reason for introducing a negative list, considering that that has already been out and under debate for the last several months?
Very likely is, though personally I think he ought not to. And the reason for that is bringing in a negative list preceding the introduction of a GST, I think, will have several very negative consequences for industry at large. So while your key factor is you're really not going to get a clear definition of what is taxable and what isn't. So today our perception, we don't have a definition of services. So our perception is what constitutes a service, and we sort of see the taxing entries in relation to that, and there's taxation. A negative list will effectively tax every transaction for money other than the supply of goods, immovable property and money itself. So several things which commonsensically are not service potentially could get taxed. So for example, if you pay for a right of first refusal, if you pay in relation to exercise of option, if you have certain other transactions in the nature of licenses, all of these today are in nobody's perception are these services. Going forwards with a negative list, all of this will be taxable.
But why can't all of this be included in that negative list or come under the list of so-called perceived services that are not meant to be taxed?
Yeah, what you effectively have is, you have a situation of saying this is service and this is now taxable, and then they have certain exclusions. Now the exclusions don't exclude any of these nature of transactions. So your risk is, the moment you give a license to tax which is this large, you have a very, very small list of what is excluded. So potentially, depending on the interpretation of the tax collector, anything which is a transaction for money could be taxed. Now your problem there is, you already have this constitutional debate in terms of what state can tax, what center can tax. You have several issues where both of them tax and you have to pay tax literally twice over. The scope for that will increase immensely. You will have a problem in terms of valuation, because when you have transactions, goods and services both, or composite services, you don't know how to value it. You will have credit related issues, because for credit you categorize services. The whole import and export of services is again based on a categorization. So the moment you give such a wide license, you create a whole realm of uncertainty, and world over, negative list is seen as a stealth tax. You don't know what will get taxed. So on day one it doesn't hit you, but the interpretation of it over a period of time brings more things to tax.
Vivek Mishra, Rohan says he shouldn't, but he will.
Yes.
Do you agree?
I partly agree with the first part that he shouldn't, because I think he should bring in a negative list at the time of GST, where this dual taxation of goods versus services is a question that will largely go away. It won't entirely go away for some technical reasons, but largely it will go away. But I don't think he will. So
tell me why you think that you don't think Pranab Mukherjee will bring in that negative list this year.
So there are two or three sectors which previous finance ministers attempted to tax, bring under the service tax law, under the current positive list approach, if I can call it that. An example is railways, another example is certain types of medical care, a third example is going back many years, goods transport by transport of goods by road. These were withdrawn. These are a couple of high-profile examples. They were withdrawn due to a lot of resistance from that affected sector. Right. And just to add to that, goods transport by road is taxable, but it's a reverse charge. It's on a corporate who pays for it. It's not the service provider who's taxable. There is no reason to think that these sectors would, in the interest of there being simplicity in tax and so on, say that, oh, this negative list is part of a larger movement and fine, we will subject ourselves to tax. They will probably again protest, and then you're taking on 2-3 very powerful sectors at the same time. So I think it's.
So you think there are political reasons for why he may choose not to bring in that negative list, is it? Because of the potential protests against it. But this is the only year he has that opportunity, Vivek, because 2 years, I mean, next year and the year after will be too close to a national election.
Yeah, so then that's also a political point. So politics is.
So why do you believe that he will bring it in, despite all the reasons that Vivek believes it won't come in?
Two reasons. One is quite clearly there is a compulsion to try and generate more revenue. Secondly, they've Secondly, they've consistently said that there are several steps that we are taking towards GST. So last year they brought in several exempted items from excise to tax. They say that this is another of those preparatory moves. Now your situation is, the moment you see this as a preparatory move, but the date for GST is uncertain, what you're doing is you're harvesting all the negative stuff, bringing it in, saying I will bring in GST, but you have no definite date for GST. The other issue that Vivek is making is, he says people will protest, but that doesn't mean they won't bring it in. The question is, if having brought it in, how will they deal with protest? And one of the issues I think which sort of supports what they've done, we all had constitutional challenges on renting. We had constitutional challenges on IPR. We had constitutional challenges on this whole reverse charge for import of services. The courts have struck down 2 of those challenges. They've said no, it is within the taxing domain to tax in relation to rent. It's within the taxing domain to tax for transactions even outside the country on reverse charge. So from that perspective, again, you have to see that courts are very hesitant to step in on constitutionality. And that's again a message they take forwards.
All right, Nageshwari, as a representative of industry, I can't imagine that industry would want a negative list to come in, yet it could be a reality facing you, though your 2 panelists are divided on that.
I wish it doesn't come, but I'm sure it will come.
Tell me your reasons for why you believe so. Are they any different from why Rohan believes so?
Not really. Because of increased revenue collections.
Sure.
Currently from the service tax the government gets about 57%. With the negative list the government envisages 63% of the revenue collections to come from the service tax. Then the second reason is it is a move towards GST. So I mean, the government would envisage GST regulations to come in, to implement GST regulations far more quicker. And as an industry, we would be wary of this negative list implementation because of 2 reasons. As Rohan has said, we would not know what are all the transactions that would be subject to service tax, which we are not aware as of today. And 2 is that the fine print is not clear. While the negative list has been released, which itself has a lot of ambiguity, the fine print of the negative list has not been released as yet. So, for example, currently the way the service export of services and import of services has been defined. Now, once the negative list comes, we really don't know what will be the export of services, what will determine the export of service, and in the absence of categorization of services, that would make it far more complicated.
Okay.
2, abatement of services, and then the valuation, that is valuation of service with respect to certain specific sectors.
Another apprehension is GST would ultimately have meant what? Every value addition is taxed, but you get credit of the preceding transaction. The problem here is you bring a negative list, so your tax footprint is wider, but your credit footprint is not that wide. So again, your tax cost and cost of doing business goes up.